Hey folks, it's Dylan from EatWild, and in this video we're going to talk about morel mushroom hunting and morel mushroom processing. How do you go out in the field, find these beautiful morel mushrooms, bring them home, freeze them, dry them, and how do you cook them and enjoy them. So we're out here, we're in the Elephant Hill burn, which is one of the largest burns that I can remember in my lifetime in the lower half of British Columbia. Now, there's been a lot of devastation, we've lost a lot of forest values, but one of the more miraculous and beautiful things is after a forest fire, there's an incredible regeneration of life. And if you see out behind me, you can see the lovely grasses and wildflowers that have really benefited from the rejuvenation of the fire ecosystem. And one of the little magic and miracles that comes with these forest fires is the morel mushroom season. So throughout these hills around us, over the next 3 or 4 weeks, there's going to be a number of flushes of these morel mushrooms, which are choice to eat. So we'll spend the next couple of days exploring around these hills, trying to figure out where these little mushrooms live, and we're going to try and figure out how we're going to find them, and then hopefully get some tips from some locals along the way for how we're going to process them and take care of them. So hope you hang out with us. So one of the places we found a bunch of morels is, you can see this sort of hill above us, and then it actually, if you can tell, it kind of benches out down here. So I think what's happening is there's just a little bit more moisture at the bottom of this bench where the water may come down. The water would flow down the hill and then eventually sort of hold up on this bench, and it seems to be producing bigger morels and more of them. So just one of those terrain features that seems to produce a few more mushrooms. So we've been looking at all different types of burn types. Some of the burns have been burnt more than others. This burn here has a slightly less, didn't burn quite as hot, because you can tell how much timber is still on the ground cover. And also you can see there's a lot of needles on the ground, which means that the treetops up here, they didn't quite scorch all the needles off. So one of the things we were looking for was needle covered forest, which is favorable for finding morels at this time of year under these circumstances. So here's a bunch that we found, and these ones are a good size to pick because they have to be bigger than your thumb. That's what they say, the pickers. And some of these bigger ones, that's a nice size one there. And then some of the smaller ones, maybe just over here, these little guys are just slightly smaller than your thumb. You can leave these guys for a couple more days and they'll keep getting bigger. So if you come back in a couple days, they'll be definitely worth picking. But yeah, great spot, and lots of them in here. Mushroom hunting partner there, doing her best to suck up as many mosquitoes. How much fun is that, eh, Claire? So I definitely seem to be finding them in little, like almost veins. They sort of run at a bit of a line up the hill or across the hill. Little patches are particularly good patches. Got lots of good ones in here. So when I pick them, I just want to cut them just below the base right there. And then you end up with just a little bit of stem on the bottom, but like that. That looks really good. Into the bucket. So I've resorted to just using a bucket with a bag inside. The plastic's kind of hard on the outside edges of these. The morels are super dainty. They crumble really easily. So the more gentle you can be with them, the better. So another thing I can talk about is, like, when you cut them off at the stem, you're leaving the roots and such behind. And what you're going for is a nice clean cut at the bottom. And so you get a nice clean mushroom with almost no dirt on it. Because eventually you're going to have to clean them up before you cook them. And you don't really want to wash mushrooms because they'll just soak up all that water. So by keeping them clean right here at the start, nice clean ends like that, and then you don't have to clean them up after. So yeah, these all look real good. Real beauties. Yeah. But over the course of a couple days, we've been able to try out a whole bunch of different things, and as we got towards the last hour of our pick today, we sort of finally figured it out where we found the highest density of larger morel size. This is the king, probably the biggest one we've come across, and we're just on our way back to the truck with our final bags full of morels. So, and that's our bounty for the 3 of us. So next up, we got to transport these back to the city. So we're going to dry them and freeze them. And you can see they're in these boxes that are vented, and they're going to stack on top of each other. So we're going to avoid crushing them, and we're going to be able to get lots of air ventilation around them so they don't start to go moldy. All right, so we just, this is the second day that we were picking, and yesterday we tried a whole bunch of different things, different elevations, different aspects, near the water, in areas that have been more burnt, areas that have been less burnt, and then we kind of found a few mushrooms, maybe 5 pounds yesterday in about 6 hours of picking. Today, with a little bit of knowledge from all the stuff we learned yesterday and a hot tip from our friend Randy, who's been mushrooming in these parts for a long time, put us onto a day where we probably got closer to 100 pounds. So awesome day. We got lots of morels, so these will be great for we'll dry a bunch out and freeze a bunch and have morels for a couple of years. All right, so we've driven back to the city with turns out to be about 100 pounds of morels between the three of us. And we were going to process them in the dehydrator, but just the volume would be probably just a little bit too much to cycle through the dehydrator. So we went and bought just some mesh here and made some makeshift drying beds, just keeping the mushrooms up off the ground. And the deck's good because lots of air coming through the decks. Okay, so what we did here is we built these racks, which have just got a couple inches underneath them between here and the deck. And that's plenty enough to get the airflow underneath them. And we also added a few fans that we had around just to get the airflow around, just to keep the air flowing over top of the mushrooms to keep them dry. So you can see down here that these have, even in just one day in the sun, these have dried right out. And they're about 80% dry. There's a little bit of dampness on them. Now they have to be 100% dry in order for you to put them in a jar, say, and leave them in your pantry for any length of time. But once we got them dried out 100%, we'll be able to put them in Ziploc bags or jars and put them in the cupboard, and they should last forever. The only thing that you may want to encounter here, like we did a really careful job of picking, so they're all very clean. A lot of people recommend washing them to get the dirt off, and also to avoid any critters that may have crawled into these cavities and potentially made this morel mushroom its home. So we haven't cleaned them because we did a nice job of picking them. So we're just going to dry them this way, and then when we go to cook them, it's always good to cut them in half to make sure that there's no critters inside. You can always, after you've dried them, you can just put them in the oven for a little while and get the temperature up to maybe 160, 180 degrees, just to kill off anything that may be living on the mushrooms. And then you can store them from there. But really, like, you're gonna put them in a frying pan and cook them pretty hot when you do get around to cooking them after you rehydrate them. So I'm sure they'll be good. So these will all dry right out. So our 30 pounds will look pretty small by the time, or 100 pounds will look pretty small by the time we're all said and done here. Anyways, it's a good way to get it done. There's a number of other tips and tricks for drying and care you can research on your own, but that's what we did with this amount of volume. All right, so I've gathered up all my morels, and this is what 35 pounds of dried morels looks like. So that's your medium-sized Tupperware. Anyways, I'm going to scoop them out of here, and I'm going to do a couple of them. I'm going to throw a bunch in a bucket. Now this bucket's got a good sealed lid, and I'll put a bunch in Ziploc bags, which I'll either throw in a dark, dry place, or even in the freezer, probably the best. Now over here, I've got a few fresh ones left here, and I've dried these out about, I don't know, 70% or something, and I'm going to try freezing those as they are. I've been told that you can get away with freezing them once they've dried out a bit. If they're too wet, they'll end up kind of exploding with the moisture in the freezer. So we'll try all that out. So they're dried right out, super crisp and crunchy, no moisture left in them, so they won't rot on me. And then into an airtight bucket to keep all the bugs out or anything that wants to get in there and eat them.